a simple favor go horribly wrong? My friend Marilyn asked me to pawn her grandmother's necklace because she desperately needed money to pay back her dealer. The necklace would only get $800, but it was a start. She owed Hunter $12,000 and was terrified he'd see her at the pawn shop because he had eyes everywhere. The pawn shop was one of those grimy places with bars on the windows and a buzzer to get in. I walked in trying to look casual, but my heart was already pounding. I was terrified somehow someone would know I was connected to Marilyn and report back to Hunter. The owner barely looked at me, just examined the necklace with his little magnifying glass and offered me $800. I was filling out the paperwork, thinking I'd actually pulled this off, when this guy sitting in the corner stood up and walked over. He'd been so still I hadn't even noticed him there, like he was part of the furniture. "That's a beautiful piece," he said, leaning over to look at it. The owner seemed nervous suddenly, his hands fumbling with the cash. The guy picked up the necklace, turning it over in his fingers, running his thumb over the ruby. "I've seen this before," he said slowly. "Ruby pendant, gold chain, little inscription on the back." He read it out loud. "To my darling Elizabeth." My stomach dropped because Marilyn's grandmother was named Elizabeth. "Your grandmother's?" the guy asked me, but his eyes said he already knew the answer. I nodded, trying to stay calm, but he smiled and shook his head. "No, it's not. I know exactly whose grandmother this belonged to." He set the necklace down gently, almost lovingly. "Marilyn wore this to her cousin's wedding last month, said it was the only valuable thing her family had left." The pawn shop owner was backing away now, hands up like he wanted no part of this. The guy turned to him and said, "Give us a minute," and the owner actually went into the back room, leaving me alone with this stranger. I tried to pick up the necklace, but he put his hand over it, not aggressive, but firm. "She owes me $12,000, he said conversationally. "Been dodging me for 3 months. And now she sends someone else to pawn her dead grandmother's necklace for what, $800? I said I didn't know anything about that, just doing a favor, but he laughed. A favor. His voice was still calm, but something in his eyes had changed, gone darker. "You know what happens when people don't pay me back?" I shook my head and he leaned in closer. "Good, you don't want to know." I tried to leave, but he said, "The necklace stays here. You're going to call Marilyn right now and tell her to come get it herself." I said I didn't have her number with me, but he grabbed my wrist, not hard, but enough to make his point. "Don't lie to me. Everyone has their phone." My hand was shaking as I pulled it out, but I couldn't find Marilyn's number because she'd made me delete it before I came. Said she was being paranoid about Hunter tracking her. He watched me scroll through my contacts twice before he believed me. "Fine," he said, letting go of my wrist. "Then you're going to tell me where she lives." I said I couldn't do that, and he stood up, revealing just how big he was. "Either you tell me where she is, or you become responsible for her debt. That's how this works." The shop felt smaller suddenly, the barred windows looking more like a cage. I told him Marilyn was my friend, and I couldn't betray her like that. He nodded like he understood, then pulled out his phone and took my picture. "Now I know who you are," he said, "and if you're really Marilyn's friend, she won't let anything happen to you." I backed toward the door, but he followed, staying close enough that I could smell cigarettes and something metallic on his clothes. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to leave here and go straight to Marilyn. You're going to tell her Hunter knows about the necklace, and you're going to tell her she has 24 hours to come see me herself." That's when I realized this wasn't just one of Hunter's lackey. This was Hunter himself, right in my face. My hand was on the door handle when he added, "Oh, and don't think about warning her to run. I've got people watching her apartment, her job, her sister's place. She runs, and this becomes your problem." I yanked the door open and practically ran out, the bell jingling cheerfully behind me like this was just another normal transaction. I made it half a block before I realized he was following me. Not running, just walking at the same pace I was, staying about 20 feet back. When I sped up, he sped up. When I turned a corner, he turned it too. My car was still 3 blocks away, and my heart was pounding so hard I felt like I might pass out. I tried ducking into a store, but he just waited outside, leaning against the window where I could see him through the glass. When I came back out, he smiled and kept following. I finally reached my car and fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before getting the door open. When I looked back, Hunter was standing right behind my car, blocking me in. He walked around to my window and tapped on it with his knuckles, patient like he had all the time in the world. "Actually, forget the 24 hours, he said calmly. "You're going to take me to Marilyn right now." When I shook my head, he pulled out a knife and rested the blade against my side mirror, letting me see how it caught the light. That wasn't a request. I opened my door with shaking hands and slid behind the wheel while Hunter walked around to the passenger side, the knife still visible in his grip. He settled into the seat and pointed the blade toward the street, telling me to drive. My hands were trembling, so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over and I pulled away from the curb, checking my mirrors like maybe someone would notice something was wrong. Hunter directed me to take a left at the next light, then another left, steering us away from the main roads where there might be witnesses or cameras. The knife rested on his thigh, blade catching the afternoon sun every time we passed under a gap in the trees. I kept glancing at it while trying to watch the road, my palms slick with sweat on the steering wheel. After a few blocks, I cleared my throat and said I needed gas, pointing at the gauge that showed less than a quarter tank. Hunter leaned over and tapped the gauge with his finger, then shook his head. "That's plenty to get where we're going." My throat felt like it was closing up as I realized he'd already checked everything, probably watched me walk to my car, noted the fuel level, planned this whole thing out. He reached across and popped open my glove box without asking, papers spilling onto the floor. My registration was right on top and he picked it up, unfolding it slowly while I tried to keep my eyes on the road. He read my address out loud, my full name, even the make and model of my car like he was memorizing it all. "Now I know where you live," he said, folding the paper and putting it in his pocket instead of back in the glove box. "In case you get any ideas about disappearing after this." He got comfortable then, adjusting the seat back and lighting a cigarette without asking if it was okay. The smoke filled my car immediately, and he rolled down the window just a crack, ashing outside but letting most of the smoke stay trapped inside with us. When we stopped at the next light, he reached over and pulled my keys from the ignition while the engine was still running, pocketing them with a little pat on his jacket. "Just for safekeeping," he said. I drove toward the big shopping center on Maple, thinking maybe the crowds would give me some kind of opportunity, or at least make him nervous about being seen. But Hunter just pulled out his phone and started texting someone, his thumb moving fast across the screen. Within maybe 2 minutes, his phone buzzed with a reply and he read it, then looked at me. "She's not at any of of her usual spots. My guy's already checked. At the next red light, I gripped the door handle, calculating if I could jump out and run before he could react. Like he was reading my mind, Hunter mentioned casually that he had my license plate now, my home address, knew my full name. Running just makes this messier for everyone, he said, examining his fingernails like we were having a normal conversation. And Marilyn still owes me 12 grand either way. I suggested we try her workplace since maybe she was hiding there after hours, using the employee entrance or something. Hunter nodded and made another call, putting it on speaker so I could hear the voice on the other end confirm they'd already checked the employee parking lot twice today. We drove in silence for a while, just the sound of Hunter smoking and the occasional direction to turn left or right. Then he started explaining how the debt had grown from 8,000 to 12, his tone like a teacher giving a lesson. See, when someone doesn't pay on time, there's interest, daily interest. And then there are late fees, processing fees, the cost of having my guys track her down. He counted on his fingers as he talked. It adds up quick. 8 becomes 10, 10 becomes 12. Next week it'll be 15. We pulled into Marilyn's workplace parking lot, one of those big office buildings with a Starbucks on the ground floor. A woman was loading boxes into her trunk and looked up when we parked nearby. I recognized her as someone from Marilyn's department and rolled down my window to ask if she'd seen her. The woman glanced at Hunter in the passenger seat and seemed to shrink back a little. Marilyn quit last week, she said quickly, already moving to close her trunk. Just stopped showing up one day, then sent an email saying she wasn't coming back. She kept looking at Hunter, who was just sitting there smiling and fumbled with her keys. I really have to go, she said, practically running to her driver's door. There's something really strange about how Hunter was just waiting in that pawn shop like he knew someone would show up with that necklace today. Makes me wonder if he's been sitting there every day or if someone tipped him off about this whole plan. We sat in the empty lot after she drove off, Hunter pulling the necklace from his pocket. He held it up to the light, turning it so the ruby caught the sun, running his thumb over the inscription again. Elizabeth must be rolling in her grave, he said, more to himself than to me, seeing what her granddaughter became. He put the necklace back in his pocket and looked at me like he was deciding something. She's got a sister, I said without thinking, just desperate to give him something. Lane lives across town, but they don't really talk anymore. Hunter nodded slowly like he already knew this. Lane Laurent works at the hospital, night shifts mostly. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something, then showed me a picture of a woman in scrubs getting into a Honda. This her? I nodded and he put the phone away. She won't open the door for me, but she might for you. He walked back to my car and got in the passenger seat, waiting for me to follow. The drive to Lane's apartment took forever because Hunter made me stay off the highways. Surface streets only, he said, keeping one hand near the door handle like he thought I might try something stupid. Every red light felt like an hour, and I kept checking the mirrors, hoping maybe a cop would pull us over for something. Hunter just sat there calm as anything, occasionally telling me which way to turn. 20 minutes later, we pulled up outside a brick building with those metal fire escapes zigzagging down the front. Hunter got out first and looked up at the windows, counting floors with his finger. 4th floor, apartment 4B. You've got 10 minutes to get her to tell you where Marilyn is. He leaned against my car where anyone looking down could see him clearly. 10 minutes, then I come up myself. The building's front door needed a code, but someone was coming out with groceries, so I caught it before it closed. 4 flights of stairs had my legs burning and my heart pounding even harder than it already was. The hallway smelled like cooking food and cigarette smoke. Apartment doors on both sides with those peepholes that always made me nervous. I knocked on 4B and heard footsteps, then nothing, like someone was looking through the peephole. Lane, it's about Marilyn, please. I need to talk to you. The chain rattled and the door opened just a crack, enough for me to see half her face. She looked past me down the hall, then her eyes went wide. Is that Hunter down there by your car? She tried to slam the door, but I stuck my foot in the gap. Please, just listen for 1 minute. I'm trying to help. She looked at my foot like she was thinking about stomping on it, then opened the door wider but kept the chain on. You brought him here? To my home? Her voice was shaking with anger or fear or both. He knows where you live anyway. He showed me your picture on his phone. That made her go pale and she undid the chain, pulling me inside quickly before shutting the door and putting the chain back on. Her apartment was small but clean, medical textbooks stacked on the coffee table, scrubs folded on a chair. She went straight to the window and looked down at Hunter, who waved when he saw her. God damn it, what did Marilyn do now? I started explaining about the necklace and the pawn shop, but Lane cut me off. She already hit me up for money last month, said it was for rent, but I knew it was for drugs or gambling or whatever she's into now. She kept watching Hunter through the window like he might disappear if she looked away. I told her no, and she called me every name in the book. I asked when she'd last seen Marilyn, and Lane laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. 3 weeks ago, she showed up here at 2 in the morning, high out of her mind, demanding money. She turned from the window and sat on the couch, putting her head in her hands. You want to know the truth? She stole from our mother's medical fund when Mom was dying of cancer. Her voice got quiet and hard. $20,000 that was supposed to pay for Mom's treatments, just gone. She looked up at me with red eyes. The family cut her off completely after that. Nobody talks to her anymore. Her phone buzzed on the table and she picked it up, then went completely white. She turned the screen toward me and there was a photo of her apartment door, taken from the hallway. Unknown number, she whispered. We both looked at the window where Hunter was still leaning against my car, now smoking a cigarette. He's letting me know he can get to me whenever he wants. Lane stood up and paced around the small living room, biting her thumbnail. There's nowhere she'd go. She's burned every bridge, used up every favor. I asked if there was anywhere Marilyn might hide, any place she kept things. Lane stopped pacing and stared at me. Wait, there's a storage unit, one of those places off Route 9. She went to the kitchen and dug through a drawer full of papers and keys. When Mom died, we had to clean out her house, put everything in storage until we figured out what to do with it. She found a yellow sticky note with numbers written on it. Marilyn was supposed to help, but she just took what she wanted and left. Never came back to help sort through anything. She handed me the note with an access code on it. Unit 247, but I haven't been there in months. Don't even know if she still has stuff there. I took the note and headed for the door, but Lane grabbed my arm. Whatever happens, don't let him hurt her. She's still my sister even after everything. I nodded and left, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Hunter was finishing his cigarette when I got back to the car, grinding it out under his heel. Storage unit off Route 9, I said, getting in the driver's seat. He smiled smiled and got in beside me. Good girl, Lane. Always was the responsible one. He directed me toward Route 9, checking his phone every few minutes. This is taking longer than expected, he said, sounding annoyed for the first time. I've got other collections today, people who actually pay on time. The storage facility was one of those huge places with orange doors and security cameras everywhere. The manager's office was a little building at the front with bulletproof glass like a bank. Hunter stayed close as we walked in, close enough that the manager noticed immediately. We need to check on Unit 247, I said, trying to sound normal. The manager, an older guy with thick glasses, looked at his computer screen. I'll need to see ID and the rental agreement. I started to explain that it was my friend's unit, but he shook his head. Sorry, no ID, no access. That's the policy. Hunter shifted behind me and the manager's eyes flicked to him, then to the security monitor showing the parking lot. Unless you're on the authorized list, I can't let you in. The manager kept glancing at the panic button next to his keyboard, sweat starting to shine on his forehead. Hunter reached into his wallet and pulled out $200 bills, sliding them across the counter toward the manager. The manager looked at the money, then at Hunter, then back at the money, before his hand slowly covered the bills and pulled them toward himself. 20 minutes, the manager said quietly. Security does rounds every hour and I won't lie if they ask me anything. Hunter nodded and the manager typed something into his computer, the gate behind us buzzing open. We walked through into the maze of storage units, the fluorescent lights humming overhead and casting harsh shadows down the long corridors. The place smelled like dust and old cardboard and something chemical, maybe bug spray or cleaning products. Hunter walked like he knew where he was going, even though I was the one who supposedly knew which unit was Marilyn's. I had to jog a little to keep up with his long strides as we turned corner after corner, the unit numbers climbing higher. The climate-controlled section was in the back, behind another door that required a code. Hunter looked at me expectantly, and I punched in the numbers Marilyn had given me months ago, when she'd asked me to grab her winter clothes. Unit 247 was halfway down the row, a standard orange door with a lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. Dust had settled on the handle, and there were cobwebs in the corner where the door met the frame. Hunter produced a pair of bolt cutters from somewhere. I hadn't even seen him carrying them and snapped the lock like it was made of plastic. The door rolled up with a screech that echoed through the hallway. Inside was exactly what you'd expect from someone's storage unit. Old furniture covered in sheets, towers of cardboard boxes with things written on them in fading marker, plastic bins full of clothes and stacks of photo albums leaning against the wall. It didn't look like anyone had been living here or even visiting regularly. Hunter stepped inside and started opening boxes methodically, not throwing things around but clearly searching for something specific. I stood in the doorway watching him work through box after box until he found a small notebook tucked between some old magazines. He flipped through it and I could see lists in Marilyn's handwriting, items and numbers next to them. The necklace was on there, $800, just like the pawn shop had offered. There was other stuff too, her laptop for $300, some designer purse for $500, even her car listed at $4,000. Hunter sat down on a dusty couch that was pushed against the wall, the notebook still in his hands. You know what's sad about this? He said, not really asking. It's always the same story. Someone needs money for whatever reason. They borrow it thinking they'll pay it back. Then life happens and suddenly they're making lists of everything they own, trying to figure out what they can sell. He flipped another page. Then they start avoiding the people they owe, which makes everything worse because now there's interest and penalties, and before you know it, 12,000 becomes 15, then 20. Why does Hunter know so much about Lane's work schedule and have her picture ready on his phone like he's been tracking her for a while? That notebook with all those items and prices makes me wonder if Marilyn was planning this whole disappearing act way before she asked for that loan. He looked up at me. And the really messed up part is it ruins everything around them. Friends become accomplices, family members become targets, everyone gets pulled into the mess. My phone buzzed and I pulled it out, hoping maybe it was Marilyn finally calling back, but it was just a spam text about car insurance. Hunter noticed and gestured at my phone. Call the pawn shop, see if she's been back. I found the number and dialed, walking a few steps away from Hunter, though we both knew he could hear everything in the quiet storage unit. The owner picked up on the third ring, and when I said who I was, his voice dropped to almost a whisper. That man you were with earlier, he came back asking about you specifically, wanted to know if I had your information from the paperwork you started filling out. My stomach clenched. I didn't tell him anything, but you need to be very, very careful. Men like him don't forget faces. The line went dead before I could respond. Hunter was watching me when I turned around. Well, I told him the owner said Marilyn hadn't been back, and he nodded like he expected that. Here's what we're going to do, he said, standing up and brushing dust off his pants. You're going to start calling her friends. Tell them she's in trouble and needs help raising money. See what they can contribute. He pulled out his own phone and started scrolling through something. I've got some numbers here if you need them. I said I didn't think her friends had that kind of money, but he just shrugged. Everyone's got something. Maybe not 12,000, but a few hundred here, a few hundred there. It adds up. He handed me his phone with a contact list pulled up. The first name was someone I recognized from Marilyn's Instagram, a girl named Jessica she went to college with. I dialed the number on my phone and it rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Hey Jessica, this is Marilyn's friend. She's in some trouble and needs help with some money. Can you call me back as soon as possible? It's really urgent. I left my number and hung up, feeling sick about dragging more people into this. Hunter had me call 3 more numbers, all going to voicemail, before he held out his hand. Let me see your banking app. I shook my head and took a step back, but he didn't move toward me, just stood there with his hand out. I already know where you live from your car registration. I know where you work from the parking sticker. I'm not trying to rob you. I just need to know you're taking this seriously. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made me unlock my phone. You can transfer $500 right now. Call it a good faith payment. Buys you and Marilyn some breathing room while we figure out the rest. I wanted to refuse, but what choice did I have? I opened my banking app and transferred $500 to the account number he gave me, watching my checking balance drop. It was most of what I had until my next paycheck. Good, Hunter said, pocketing his phone. Now we're going to your place. My whole body went cold. Why? He started walking toward the exit and I had to follow. Because if Marilyn's desperate enough to send you to pawn her dead grandmother's necklace, she's desperate enough to show up at your apartment asking for help. And when she does, I want to be there. We walked back through the maze of corridors, past the manager who didn't look up from his computer and out to the parking lot. Hunter directed me to drive and gave me turn-by-turn directions even though I obviously knew how to get to my own apartment. The whole drive I kept thinking about him knowing where I lived, being able to come back whenever he wanted. My building was a typical 4-story complex with outdoor stairs and a small parking lot. As we walked up to my unit on the second floor, my neighbor Mrs. Constance was coming down with her little white dog. She looked at Hunter, then at me, and I could see the concern in her eyes. I tried to smile and act normal, but my face felt frozen. She kept staring as we passed, even turned to watch us go up the stairs. I fumbled with my keys at the door, dropping them once before managing to get it open. Hunter followed me inside, and I watched him take in everything. My mail on the counter with my full name visible, the photos on my fridge of me with friends and family, my work schedule stuck to the wall with a magnet showing all my shifts at the restaurant. He didn't touch anything, just observed, filing it all away. "You have any cash here?" he asked. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the envelope I kept in my dresser drawer with my emergency money, $240 that I'd been saving for car repairs. Hunter took it and counted it, then handed me back $40. "For gas," he said. "You're going to need it because tomorrow we're going to visit every single person Marilyn knows until we find her." The next morning, Hunter was already awake when I got up, sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through his phone. He'd made coffee and was eating the last of my cereal straight from the box. I grabbed my phone to check messages and quickly opened my email app while he wasn't looking. My roommate was out of town, but I sent her an email with just my location pin and the word help before switching to my texts. Hunter looked up and asked what I was doing. I showed him the screen with my empty text messages, and he went back to his phone. After we finished the coffee, he said we should start with someone who might know where Marilyn was hiding. There was this mutual friend who worked at a coffee shop downtown that Marilyn went to all the time. Hunter seemed to know everything about Marilyn's daily routine, all her friends, where she worked, where she got her hair done. We drove to the coffee shop in my car with Hunter giving directions like he'd been there 100 times before. The place was one of those trendy spots with exposed brick and mismatched furniture. When we walked in, I noticed two men sitting at separate tables who both looked up at us immediately. One was reading a newspaper, but I could see his eyes tracking us over the top of it. The other one was pretending to work on a laptop, but kept glancing our way every few seconds. Hunter saw me looking at them and said quietly that they were his guys making sure nobody tried anything stupid. The barista knew Marilyn but hadn't seen her in weeks, and suggested we try her yoga studio or maybe talk to Lane. Hunter's eyes lit up at that name, and he pulled out his phone to make a call. We sat down at a corner table, and I watched the two men continue their fake activities while keeping us in sight. My phone started ringing with a blocked number, and Hunter nodded for me to answer it. It was Lane's voice on the other end saying she might be able to help, but only if we met somewhere public with security cameras. Hunter leaned in to listen and nodded his approval when she suggested the central bus depot. Lane said she wouldn't come unless it was somewhere with lots of people and cameras everywhere. The bus depot made sense because security was tight there, and Hunter's people would have to spread out. Hunter agreed, and we left the coffee shop with his two guys following at a distance. The bus depot was about 20 minutes away, and the whole time Hunter kept checking his phone for updates. The place was packed with travelers dragging suitcases and homeless people trying to stay warm near the heaters. Hunter stayed close to me, but I could see his men had to spread out in the crowd. They were easier to spot now, standing near pillars and trying to blend in with the travelers. Lane showed up about 10 minutes later, staying near the crowds and keeping pillars between us as she walked over. She didn't come close, just stayed about 10 feet away and talked loud enough for us to hear over the announcements. She said Marilyn had been detoxing at a motel yesterday, but might run if she saw Hunter directly. Hunter thought about it for a minute, then said he'd let me and Lane go to Marilyn first while he waited in the car. It was the first time he'd compromised on anything since this whole thing started. I could tell he was getting tired of chasing Marilyn around the city. Lane said she'd drive separately and we could follow her to the motel. Everyone was tense about this possibly being some kind of setup, but Hunter seemed willing to take the risk. We walked back to the parking garage with Lane going to her car on a different level. Hunter kept checking his phone for messages from his network of people watching for Marilyn. The drive to the motel took about 30 minutes with Lane's Honda ahead of us the whole time. Hunter was quiet, just watching the road and occasionally texting someone. The motel was one of those cheap extended stay places off the highway with weekly rates posted on a faded sign. We pulled into the parking lot and Lane parked near the office while we stayed back a few spaces. Hunter gave me $50 to give to the desk clerk for information about what room Marilyn was in. The clerk was this older guy watching TV who barely looked up when we walked in. Lane asked if her friend had checked in yesterday, describing Marilyn, but the guy just shrugged and said he couldn't give out guest information. Hunter came in and slid the 50 across the counter, but the clerk pushed it back and said that wasn't how things worked here. We ended up having to rent a room ourselves, and Lane suggested we get the one next to where she thought Marilyn might be staying. The clerk gave us a key to room 247, and Lane whispered that Marilyn was probably in 246 based on a text she'd gotten earlier. Hunter stayed in the hallway while Lane and I went to knock on Marilyn's door. Nobody answered when we knocked, so Lane pressed her ear against the door, and we could hear someone moving around inside, footsteps going back and forth like they were pacing. Room 247 feels like the wrong choice here. Why would Lane suddenly know which room Marilyn's in after the clerk refused to help? The timing of that text message seems awfully convenient when Hunter's been tracking her for days without success. Hunter came over from the hallway and tried the door handle, but it was locked. He pulled something from his pocket, a thin piece of metal, and worked it into the lock, while Lane and I stood there watching. The lock clicked open in maybe 10 seconds like he'd done this 100 times before. We went inside and the room smelled like sweat and old food. There were empty bottles on the nightstand and pills scattered on the bed, the kind you get for withdrawal. A phone was on the floor with a half-typed text that said, "I'm sorry for getting you involved," with my name at the top, but it hadn't been sent. The bathroom window was open with the screen pushed out and lying in the parking lot below. Hunter stuck his head out the window and looked around, then came back shaking his head. Lane started crying and turned on me, saying this was all my fault for trying to pawn that necklace in the first place. She said I should have just stayed out of it instead of making everything worse and getting everyone involved. I wanted to defend myself, but Hunter's phone rang and he answered it while Lane kept going on about how I'd ruined everything. Hunter hung up and said someone matching Marilyn's description was at the Riverwalk asking people for money, and this was the last stop because he was done chasing her around. We went back to my car and I could see an SUV pull out behind us when we left the parking lot. During the drive, I kept thinking about just yanking the wheel and crashing into a telephone pole to end this whole thing, but that SUV stayed right behind us the whole time. Hunter must have noticed how tense I was because he said problems don't just disappear when you try to run from them, they just transfer to someone else, usually someone you care about. The river walk was mostly empty when we got there, just a few joggers and people walking dogs. We walked along the path for maybe 15 minutes before Marilyn appeared from behind the public restrooms. She was so thin I almost didn't recognize her, shaking even though it wasn't cold, and when she looked at me her eyes were hollow like she wasn't really seeing me. She looked between Hunter and me without saying anything at first. Then she asked Hunter if they could talk privately, and he nodded, so Lane and I went back to wait by the car. I watched them from maybe 30 feet away, Hunter standing relaxed with his hands in his pockets while Marilyn moved her hands around desperately trying to explain something. I couldn't hear everything but caught pieces when the wind was right, numbers mostly like 3,000 now and something about payment plans and weekly check-ins. Marilyn kept nodding at whatever Hunter was saying, but he kept shaking his head at most of what she offered. After maybe 10 minutes, Hunter started walking back toward us, and Marilyn grabbed his arm trying to stop him. I tensed up thinking he might hurt her, but he just removed her hand gently and kept walking, leaving her standing there by herself looking lost. When he got to the car, Hunter told me Marilyn could only scrape together $3,000 right now, but needed collateral for the rest of what she owed. Without even thinking about it, I said he could have my car title if that would end this whole nightmare. Hunter looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and said that would work as long as I understood what I was getting into. Lane started to protest, but I told her to stop because I just wanted this to be over. Hunter made a call, and within 20 minutes, another car showed up with a guy who had paperwork ready. I signed over my car title right there in the parking lot using the hood as a desk, while Marilyn watched from a distance. The guy took pictures of my car from every angle and wrote down the mileage and VIN number. Hunter told me I had 6 months to pay back the remaining $9,000, or the car was his, and if I missed even one monthly payment, the whole thing would accelerate. I agreed to everything without really listening because all I could think about was getting away from these people. Marilyn finally came over when we were done with the paperwork and tried to hug me, but I stepped back because I couldn't deal with her right then. She started crying and saying she never meant for this to happen, but I just walked away toward the street to call an Uber. Lane followed me, and we left Marilyn there with Hunter and his people still doing whatever business they had left. The Uber driver asked if we were okay because I guess we looked pretty shaken up, but neither of us answered him. When I got home, I realized I'd just signed away my only way to get to work and had taken on a debt I couldn't afford, but at least Hunter wasn't following me anymore. I spent the rest of that day in bed trying not to think about what I'd just done or how I was going to explain this to anyone who asked where my car went. The next morning, Hunter called and said the car thing wasn't done right and we needed to meet at his cousin's tow yard to do real paperwork. I dragged myself out of bed and called another Uber while Marilyn showed up at my door looking worse than yesterday. Hunter was already at the tow yard when we got there, this big dirt lot full of broken cars behind a chain link fence. His cousin ran the place and had all these forms ready on a clipboard that I had to sign while Hunter watched. The paper said I was selling the car for $1, which made my stomach turn, but I signed them anyway. Marilyn stood there the whole time not saying anything, not even looking at me, just staring at her shoes like they were the most interesting thing in the world. My face got hot signing away my car in front of these people who didn't care that this was ruining my life. Hunter took my spare key from my keychain and tossed it to his cousin, who went to move my car to the back of the lot. That's when a patrol car pulled up outside the fence and 2 cops got out looking serious. Hunter didn't even flinch, just told his cousin to keep doing what he was doing while he walked over to meet them at the gate. One of the cops was older with gray hair, and the other was younger, maybe 30, with these sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The older cop said they got a call about someone leaving a concerning note at a gas station and were doing a welfare check. I realized the clerk from yesterday must have called about my note asking for help. The younger cop, whose badge said Reed Muller, asked if he could talk to me separately while his partner stayed with Hunter and Marilyn. We walked over to the patrol car, and Reed asked if I was in danger or being held against my will. I told him it was complicated, but technically, I wasn't being held anymore, which was true since Hunter had my car now. Reed pulled out his card and handed it to me, explaining that without direct threats or violence, this was a civil matter, and the police couldn't do much. He said I should document everything that happened and maybe file for a restraining order if I felt unsafe. I wanted to tell him everything, but Hunter was watching from across the lot, and I knew making this worse would only hurt me more. Reed seemed to understand without me saying it because he wrote his personal cell number on the back of the card and said to call if anything changed. After the cops left, Hunter walked over and said the timeline just got shorter because of my little stunt with the note. Instead of a week, Marilyn now had 48 hours to come up with the next payment or things would get much worse for both of us. He was keeping the necklace and my car, and Marilyn had to check in with him every week to show she was working on getting his money. Lane showed up then in her Honda Civic, and Hunter told her to drive me home while Marilyn would take the bus somewhere else. The ride was completely silent, with Lane not even turning on the radio, just driving and smoking with the window cracked. When we got to my apartment, I went straight inside and texted my roommate that I was okay, but we needed to talk when she got home. Then I sat at my desk and started writing down everything that had happened since Marilyn first asked me to pawn that necklace. I wrote about Hunter at the pawn shop, the knife against my car, signing over my car, every single detail I could remember. That night after my roommate went to bed, I changed the locks on our door using a kit I bought at the hardware store. My hands shook the whole time, but I got it done and tested both new keys twice to make sure they worked. Then I went through my phone and blocked Marilyn's number along with any mutual friends who might give her my new number if I changed it. I opened my laptop and typed up everything I'd written down earlier into an email to Detective Reed Muller using the email on his card. I attached photos I'd taken of my car at the tow yard and screenshots of texts from Marilyn from before all this started. The email was 3 pages long by the time I finished, and I read it twice before hitting send. I was done being anyone's collateral damage and done being dragged into other people's problems that had nothing to do with me. My car was gone, my friendship with Marilyn was over, and I had a detective's card in my wallet in case Hunter decided 48 hours hours was too long to wait. Thanks for sticking with me while I wondered through all this. Definitely been a journey of questions together. Until we meet again. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.